Good afternoon and welcome to Promo Perspectives, the podcast presented by Sage, dedicated to giving promotional product suppliers and distributors tips and tricks to help them grow their business. We have been doing a series on social media and digital marketing strategies, and today I am joined by Sage's Senior Brand Marketing Manager, Nicole Cook, to talk about brand marketing. Nicole, welcome to the show.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming on. Why don't you introduce yourself to the audience? Tell them a little bit about you and your background in marketing and brand marketing specifically.
Sure. So like Gabe said, my name is Nicole Cook. I'm the Senior Brand Marketing Manager here at Sage. And I have been here a little under a year. I'm almost at a year's mark. And this actually puts me under a year in the promo industry as well. So new to promo, but not new to marketing, not new to brand marketing. My background has actually spanned a few industries. I started off in the restaurant industry. I went to fitness. Before this, I was in finance. And what I will say is that what I've learned in each industry is that there's always a lot to learn, and there's a lot to learn about the nuances between the industries and all the acronyms and all of that good stuff. But what is cool to see is that the marketing principles really remain the same. So I've had experience doing brand marketing in all of the above industries, and so I feel like it makes me have a really unique perspective for our conversation today.
Well, and like you said, those principles, not only do they transfer across industries, even within our industry, right? Like we are made up of at least three segments here in the promo industry, the suppliers, the distributors, and the business service providers. But everything that we are going to talk about really applies to everybody, especially with brand marketing, because it's a lot more, I think, generally applicable than some of the things I talked about in the main episode with like specific marketing channels.
Totally agree.
To kick us off, why don't you kind of define and tell us what brand marketing is? It's just logos, right? It's the company's logo?
No, not logos. We'll start off by saying what brand marketing is not. Branding is not just your logo. It's not just the colors. It's not even your website design. It is really the sum total of every interaction that someone has with your company. And you can really think about it as about the perception that your customers have about you and also the promise that you're making. So like, are you promising reliability, creativity, speed, things like that? All of that together and the perception that your customers have about you is what really makes up a brand.
Well, and we talked about in the main episode all these different channels that you can use for marketing. And there are some channels that are better for building like brand authority, but no matter what channel you're using, that brand should be coming through loud and clear. And the way that comes through is something we talked about in the main episode is building a buyer persona. And a big part of that is the informational need that they have versus the marketing message that you convey to them, and how that marketing message is not just like a blunt answer to their information need. It's building a subconscious relationship with them to show that you solve their problems.
Yep.
And how does branding tie into that?
Yeah, so I would say that you can really think of like branding as the actions you're taking, and then the brand is, again, that like perception promise. And a good brand, I heard this saying recently and I really liked it, that a good brand you can think of like a shortcut. So it is like a shortcut into your consumer's mind, meaning if you have your marketing messages and what you're saying about your brand, and if there's already a positive perception attached to that, then you've like fast-tracked your way to earning their trust and earning trust with your customers, and then it helps them connect the why am I doing business with you and not just what is it that you offer. That's really what you're trying to get to, the intrinsic values. And to your point, having a buyer persona is part of that. I feel like it's the part, it helps you put into your mind of like, if you put it in a persona perspective, it's like, this person is who would talk to my customer. If my brand was a person, they would talk to this person and they would get along, and this person would be able to convince that person to do business with me. So that's kind of where you need to start when it comes to branding. And when it comes to building a persona, kind of tying it back to what you were saying in your main episode, is that there's really, I would say, like 3 core steps that you should start with. So the first and the most important by far is figuring out what is your mission and what do you stand for. So for example, Sage, our mission is to provide innovative products that move our industry forward. That is our why we do business, and that helps to inform every decision that we make. So ask yourself that question, like, why is it that you exist, and like, what is it that your company stands for? Is it that you are standing for reliability, speed? Like, go beyond just the what it is that you're doing. So that's kind of step one. And then the second step is to figure out what is your personality associated with it. Like, think about, like I said, you're talking about brand personas. That person would have a personality. What does that look like? For us here at Sage, excuse me, I would say that we have what I have coined a seriously fun persona, meaning that we are professionals and we are experts in the industry. So we come with our, our authoritative tone, I would say, in that we want people to know that they can trust what we're saying and that we are experts in what we're talking about. But also, Sage as a company is a really fun place. And so we also have fun with that, and we find ways to incorporate fun in our branding. And so that's where you get our seriously fun. So like, what is it that someone would say about your company? Is it that you're empathetic? Are you educational? Are you approachable? Things like that are kind of where you want to think about, like, what is it that your persona is? And you want that persona to match with, again, what people's perceptions of you are. And then the third thing that you need to have is a unique selling proposition. This really ties into the first note about understanding what your mission is and your why. That helps you figure it out. But you need to figure out, like, what is it that makes you different and better than your competitors? So, like, again, is it that your quality of your products is different than the others? Is it that you practice sustainability, things of that nature? In an industry like promo, where oftentimes people are selling similar products, it oftentimes is the brand that becomes the differentiator.
Yeah, and that was exactly what I was going to ask you about that too, because especially people that are listening to this show, they have access to all of the same database of products. They're selling within relatively the same margins, so they're not likely making their competitive advantage product selection or price. So it has to be something else, and that something else is going to be tied to their brand identity. Going back kind of that personality and voice, because like you said, Sage, we have this professional but also kind of fun and a little silly but never crossing the line. And I think a lot of that comes from the kind of company that we are, which is to say a software company. And obviously software, it's literally very like straightforward and professional. It's code, it's understanding of logic, and it's businesses, but it also has this kind of cultural background in like Silicon Valley and the young go-getters who are a little out there and have beanbag chairs in the office. But then on the flip side, I know a lot of that tone also comes from the team behind the marketing. Like now we have the next generation has come in. We have millennials and Gen Z are running our social media, and that tone tends to be a little more sardonic, a little more tongue-in-cheek. And that's kind of what, especially in social media, is expected these days. So my question is, how much of a brand identity should come from just the logistics of who you are as a company, and how much should come from what is kind of expected from you in that space?
That is a great question. I would say that, again, start with who you are and having a deep understanding of who you are as a company, and then finding ways to play into the trends and like the evolving landscape of social media, to stick with your example, and start there. I feel like too often, because we have like the younger generation coming up and they have the buying power now, people are trying to jump on trends and like do their TikTok dances, and that might not make sense. And I will say one thing about Gen Z and the younger generations is they can sniff that out. They really value authenticity over everything. There's a lot of studies that have come out about that. It is authenticity, authenticity, authenticity. So if you are out there and you are not necessarily like the most playful brand, and then all of a sudden you're out there doing like a TikTok dance, that might not make the most sense for you. But there are ways that you can play into it. So it's really like knowing who you are, knowing what your audience sees and what they expect of you, and then finding ways to lean into that in ways that make sense. So it might not be the TikTok dance, but maybe there's a social media trend going around that's a little silly and tongue-in-cheek, and you can hop on that, and that one is perfectly fine. Maybe, in fact, if you are a brand that offers one of your promises is transparency, and maybe there's a trend going on about like office hijinks. Maybe that could be fun. Show a little behind the scenes of like a day in the life at your office and how you have some fun with that. So it's not necessarily, maybe it's not your go-to tone and personality, but it ties back to that transparency core value. And so then it still makes sense. And then you're accomplishing both being relevant and staying with the times, but also being true to yourself.
So can you kind of give an example of all three of these things for a hypothetical? Let's say a company that is focused on eco-friendly and sustainable products. What might their brand identity be by these three pillars?
So if we're going to use the three pillars of core value, mission, brand persona, personality, and then your unique selling proposition, I'd say your core value could be sustainability. And you value sustainable practices, sustainable sourcing, things of that nature. That can be like your why. That's why you're in it. You want to push sustainable products forward. Your personality then might be educational, but also passionate, because you want people to really get behind your mission. I have a friend of mine who is an herbologist, and she categorizes plants and like fossilized plants all day long. And let me tell you what, I don't understand what she really does on a day-to-day basis, but the way that she explains her job and the science behind it is so informative, and she explains it in ways that make sense to me, but also she has so much passion behind it that like I want to listen more. Like, do I naturally really care about plants? Maybe not. I have the opposite of a green thumb, so it's not really my thing, but her passion makes me want to listen more. And so like I have her in my head. That's like my persona in my head, as someone who's educational, passionate about their sustainability. And then the unique selling proposition might be that you have ethical sourcing, and maybe you have like a really strong story to tie back to your products. I've seen, now that I've been out and about at shows, I've seen quite a few products that are super cool, where you can see like having this product or doing business with this company has a direct tie on trees planted, or it goes back to recyclable wearables and things like that. So like you can have a really strong story that makes you unique. And so all of those things together would help build the perception of your eco-friendly brand.
So once you've completed this very first step of building and identifying what your brand is, the next step is obviously going to be actually putting that into practice with your marketing campaigns. And in the last episode, I talked about some of what I consider to be the main channels in digital marketing and how they all have their different quirks and best practices and uses. And these were things like SEO, paid advertising, content marketing, social media, email marketing. With these wide array of different channels and all of their quirks, how do you go about maintaining consistency in each of these things with your brand?
Yeah, that is a great question, and consistency is key. Again, if you're thinking about your brand being the total of everything that you put out there and every interaction your customer has, they need to have a consistent experience across to keep reinforcing that brand in their heads. So, for example, if you are saying that you are innovative and that's one of your promises is innovation, if you have an outdated website, like you have old information, or the design doesn't look up to current design trends, then that is a direct contradiction to your innovation brand promise, and it doesn't help connect those two items together. So like website is an example. If you're doing content marketing, like blogs, videos, podcasts like this one, if you are doing anything like that, the content is kind of like how you tell your brand, like how you show your brand besides not just telling about your brand. And so that also should have a consistent experience. That's where like your personality should really come through. If you're having seriously fun, like we're doing at Sage, you can have some banter on your podcast while you're talking about things like branding best practices. So you can marry the two, make sure that those make sense. If you are saying that you are an approachable brand, and then your email subject lines have really big words, and you open the email and it's a lot of like technical development jargon, then that is also not a connection. And so that is also contradicting your brand promise of being approachable. So you have to be consistent across all your brands. And like a good example, I would say, is this podcast as an example. You'll notice if you guys go and look at the email you got about all the episodes coming out, if you look at our social media, if you look at the website that houses the podcast, you'll see that it is a very consistent brand experience. And it's not just the colors and the logo. It's also how we talk about the podcast and the way the podcast is presented, all of that plays into, those are multiple different touch points for just this one podcast, but they all have a very consistent experience.
Yeah, and what I really like that you pointed out is that it is not just visual consistency, which it is. That's definitely a big part of it, but that's not even just branding. That's just like general marketing basic principles, is to make sure you have consistent branding. Like the podcast has branding. We have colors that we follow. We have logos that we use. Sage has its branding. We have colors that we follow. But then, like you said, the philosophies behind that have to be reflected in the quality and the content of what you're doing. So the next step in a marketing process, because we talked about like the building, the executing, and then there's the measuring and the growing, right? With all of the other things I talked about in my main episode, it's pretty straightforward how you measure a lot of that stuff. Like let's say that your marketing goals were based around lead generation. You can very specifically get a number of how many new leads entered into your CRM in a period of time and how many of those converted and therefore were quality leads. And you can track all kinds of stuff. But there is no single metric that is your brand authority has risen by this much. Yet measuring results and iterating is still a fundamental part of a strategy. So how does that fit into brand marketing?
You are hitting on what every brand marketer has ever, I'm sure they've had to go to bat for providing value on the branding a ton. This is a tough subject. It's not tough, but it seems tough because to your point, there's no like one metric that says like, yeah, brand good or, brand not doing good. So you have to kind of find other KPIs, of which there are many, that speak to your overall brand health, even if it's not like a direct branding KPI. So for example, your website engagement, how much time are people spending on your page? Are they going to just one page, like the home page during their visit, or are they clicking through multiple pages? This can tell you if your website is providing valuable content. Like if you can see that they're spending a good amount of time and they're clicking through pages, that is probably a good indicator that you're providing content that people actually engage with and care about. Or not. If you're seeing that people are just like clicking through and they only get to the home screen, well, maybe that means that they saw an ad of yours, clicked on it, and then didn't find anything of value and they bounced right off. So that is kind of an indicator that shows genuine engagement with your brand versus just quick hit visits. Social media is a huge one. Likes, comments, shares, saves, follows, follower growth. Those are all indicators to tell you how is your brand resonating with people. Also in social media, you have the benefit of people being able to interact. And so you can see if people are actually like physically, if they like what you're putting out there. You can tell if like this seriously fun tone is even resonating with them. Maybe you came out with a brand persona that you thought made sense in your head, but when you actually take it to your customers, it is not jiving. Your engagement, social media can tell you if those two are matching up. And if they aren't, that gives you an opportunity to figure out what you can do differently and how you can tweak it to better match what their expectations are. Another good one is brand sentiment. There are a lot of tools out there, some free, that help you with what's called brand listening and social listening. Basically, it helps you to figure out what people are saying about your brand in spaces that you might not actively be in. But a more straightforward one would be like your Google reviews. Like those are direct feedback from your customers to see if you have, you can use the metric of like, are we above 4 stars? Are we a 5-star company? Are we below 4 stars? Why? What are people saying about it? Is it because our lead times are too long? Is our production time too long? Those are things that you can then take back and grow from and learn. And then if you can overcome those challenges, now you're back to becoming the brand in their head that they want to see. And then I'd say a last good one that and of course there's many, but just for the few that I think are really strong ones, are also like referrals and repeat business. Like that's direct. Are you only getting people one-off because you had a special and someone just wanted a quick, cheaper option? Or are you seeing the same people come back and, back and again, and then are they telling other people about you? Like, how's the word of mouth sounding? That can also tell you if your brand has a really strong perception. So again, while these may not be directly a branding KPI, they are all still good indicators of your overall brand health.
I think that is an excellent way to look at it because, like you said, you have to go to bat and show that what you're doing for your company has value. And it is hard to find those single metrics that do that, but it is important to measure them anyways. I think that kind of covers the process. Just very generally, obviously brand marketing is too big to cover on one episode of a podcast, but there are lots of great resources if people want to learn more. I know that HubSpot has great educational resources on how to improve your brand, things like that. I highly recommend people go take a look at that. I thank you so much for sharing your expertise today. Do you have anything else that you want to share? Any final messages or parting words for the audience?
Yeah, I'd say that just remember that your brand really is the core of who you are. It is like you have your own personal brand, your company has a brand. And it's really remembering that your brand is the promise that you make and then the perception that you have with your customers. So take the time to invest in understanding what your brand is heavily. Take that time to really figure out who you are, be relentlessly consistent, and then realize that understanding a strong brand leads to positive perception in your customers' brains, which only then translates into higher sales and a more successful and flourishing company. So if you can focus on really investing in your brand, it really, really helps. It trickles down into all aspects of your business from there.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on the show, Nicole, and thanks everybody for listening. If you have any questions about how you can integrate anything you've learned in the last several episodes about marketing into your strategy, or if there's topics you'd like to hear us cover on the show, reach out to us on social media, share that information and your opinions with us, and we just want to provide value to you. So thanks for listening, thanks for subscribing, and we'll see you on the next one.